Today is Friday, October 4th of 2024. Yes, folks, we are into October in 2024. It may not feel that way all throughout the United States, but fall is beginning to fall all throughout the country, even here in central Indiana, where we have had some very warm temperatures of late. We're beginning to see a few, how should I put it, hints that fall is on the way. We welcome you to our Chapter 49 podcast. My name is Larry Lannan. I'm a volunteer with Chapter 49 dealing with communications. So we're very happy you've chosen to take a little bit of your time to join us. NTEU Chapter 49 represents most IRS employees in the state of Indiana, and we welcome our chapter president, Duncan Giles.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
I'll start off right off the bat. Next week will be one of those weeks. Sometimes Duncan and or I have personal situations going on. It's my turn next week, so we will not have a podcast next week, but we will be back 2 weeks from now. When we talked a week ago, we knew that Hurricane Helene had already started impacting central Indiana with some bad storms, high winds, that kind of thing, and we're way far away from the Gulf of Mexico. Well, what we have since learned is that North Carolina has taken a horrible hit. And there are many states that are in the southeastern part of the U.S. that are suffering badly. You look at the news film and still pictures coming out of places like Asheville, North Carolina, and Western Tennessee, and the suffering is just really awful there. So I want to just remind people that NTEU has always been a partner with an organization, a nonprofit called FOIA, the Federal Employee Education and Assistance Program. They do a lot of assisting, scholarships, and so forth, as Duncan mentioned before. Anytime there's a natural disaster, FOIA is in there helping federal employees in particular. If you want to know how to contribute to FOIA to help fellow federal employees in a time of need, like this hurricane aftermath that is happening in the southeast U.S., I should say, please go to ntu.org and you can look FOIA up as well. You're welcome to contribute. Also, there's a leave transfer program that has been established. So particularly as we get into lose or use leave time, if you have some extra leave that you may think you can give up, feel free to transfer some of your leave into this transfer program to help these people who are desperately in need of some paid leave to kind of get their lives back in order. Some of them lost their homes completely and they have to start over again. This is a tough thing to do. So, Duncan, this is one of those times when we all need to kind of, close ranks and help those that need help.
Absolutely. And as I'm sure everyone has seen, the devastation in Florida, in Georgia, but the unexpected devastation in the Appalachia area in North Carolina and Tennessee in particular has just been horrifying. When you see whole houses just get washed away, several hundred miles from the ocean, from lakes overflowing, and just because of the torrential rains and storms that have happened, your heart just breaks for those people that have had those types of issues. I mean, here in central Indiana, we had people without power for days because of these storms, and it made it extremely tough for everybody. But, your heart just truly goes out to those who've had everything they've had wiped out just because of these storms. And, I'm sorry, climate change is real, and these types of things, the storms keep getting worse and worse. In my mind and in scientists' mind due to this. So it's just a sad after effect that happens.
Yeah, the climate scientists are telling us there will not be more storms like this, but climate change will impact the intensity of these storms. And unfortunately, we have seen just that. And I hate to say it, but I've been told that there is another tropical depression heading toward the Gulf. You hope it doesn't morph into something as bad as Helene or some of the other storms that we have seen. So again, if you'd like to help federal employees through leave transfer or the FOIA program, contact your local chapter or just go to ntu.org and you can find out more information that way. And any chapter, here in Chapter 49, Duncan and his staff of of stewards and people working with Chapter 49 will do everything we can to help you, and wherever you may be watching or listening, your local chapter can do the same. Let's move on to what's happening with our people. And the first thing I'm going to talk about, revenue officers. Revenue officers have some of the toughest work in all the IRS. They go out in the field and they personally contact people who have problems paying their taxes, or in some cases, just even filing their returns. But revenue officers have to go out in the field and take care of this. When a situation gets to a pretty high point, that's when the collection revenue officers begin to do their work. And every case they work has complexities, and every case they work has difficulties involved of various types. We've seen this throughout the federal government and the service, unfortunately, where people are just to get their work done and to get their inventories to where they need to be. They're working off the clock. Duncan likes to call this love time. There's not a lot of love going on with that time. That means you're giving up your time. And we have a lot of very dedicated revenue officers out there that just do it because they think that it's necessary. But the real question is, to what extent should revenue officers be expected to put in this love time? How much extra work are they doing off the clock just to get their work done? So NTEU recently did a survey of revenue officers and asked some very specific questions about this. And Duncan, we came up with some very interesting answers, didn't we?
Yep, and unfortunately, not surprising. And the love term, I had heard that even before I became chapter president. But this type of thing has been an issue with revenue officers, but with several different parts of the agency since before I became president, and that was over 23 years ago. And basically, what it is the inventories get larger, and then they have little twists to it, like, okay, if you're doing this year, oh, now I've got to do this year. It's the same case, but now another year has popped up and it's essentially another case. Or it's, just one of those things where the administration of what you need to do on cases has become so much more than it used to be. Used to be a revenue officer could go out, figure out who owes what. I had an old branch chief that used to tell me I used to ride up in my Harley, get off, and then knock on the door and say, "You need to pay me." Those don't happen anymore because we want to, in fairness, we want to make sure the taxpayers' rights are protected. And so we've absolutely done that, but that creates a lot more hoops for people like revenue officers to jump through to make sure that they are dotting every I, crossing every T. And because of that, it makes the job much more difficult to stay on top of, in addition to the inventory that you have to make sure that you are touching, every so often, or you'll get in trouble for that. So a lot of employees, revenue officers, and again, other jobs as well, do work in the evenings. They'll do work on the weekends that they don't put in time for. They don't put credit hours in. They don't put, any comp time or anything of that nature in, because they don't want to get in trouble or look like they can't handle their inventory. Unfortunately, what this does is it gives upper level management the false sense of security to say, "Hey, look, they're handling it okay. There's no problems. It's not too much. They seem to be working." And that's one of the reasons NTU National did this survey, to show that, yeah, they're getting their inventory done, but it's at a cost to their personal lives. And, I'm a huge one of people who've regularly listened or watched this podcast know this is work. This is not life. When you're off here, you should be spending time with your family, your friends, doing things that you enjoy, recharging your battery. But because, you have so much work to do when you have these cases, that you want to be a conscientious employee. You want to make sure that you're on top of it. And so because of that, you get the love time thing that we are trying to eliminate. So NTU National is taking this to collection, and specifically the head of SPSE, to try and see what we can do to curb this. And several attempts have been made over the years, and we're going to make another one because it's just not right. Our national president, Doreen Greenwald, was a revenue officer. She knows exactly what this means, what happens with this, how this works. And she knows it's not right. So she wants to try and make sure that employees who are impacted like this can get ease up and be able to do their regular jobs.
Duncan, I really do go by that when I say the revenue officers have some of the toughest work in the service with what they have to do out in the field. I remember a story a revenue officer told me once. He was in a really tough neighborhood of Indianapolis, and he was hanging out at a bar looking. It was just drinking. He was looking for people. It's a good place to find people sometimes if you're a revenue officer. And he looked out and saw that all of the tires and wheels on his car had been taken. They were concrete blocks. So he he went to the bartender and said, "Here's who I am. Here's what I'm doing. By the time I get back, I want my wheels back on my car." Came back an hour later. Everything was back on perfectly, just the way it was before. I just thought that was funny. And it's I mean, you never know what's going to happen when you're out there in the field. I think the other part of this, Duncan, and maybe this is just a shot across the bow to the management, that if you, the service, if you don't start working on this, there are formal actions NTEU can take that could be very expensive for the agency.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where NTU just won a very large victory for the folks at our Customs and Border Protection, CBP, over basically overtime work. And this could be, something akin to that if the agency doesn't listen, if the agency doesn't say, we're not going to make these changes. The other part of this is the workforce is different than it was 20 years ago. If you're telling people that are coming into the workforce now as revenue officers, hey, look, not only do we want you to go out into the field, we want you to knock on people's doors who are very unhappy. No, you can't take any weapons whatsoever. They're probably going to have a weapon, but you're not going to have a weapon. They'll have a weapon in their house, not brandished at them for the very large part, thank goodness. But now we're going to basically, for you to keep up, expect you to work off the clock. This generation that is coming in now is not going to stand for that. And we have to have revenue officers to go out and collect these, returns, collect the funds that are owed legally to do this. So we need to make a way for the job of revenue officer, revenue agent, TCO, whoever it is, folks in TAS, whoever it is who have these inventories, who are doing this job, to make the job more palatable, to make it work properly, and to give them a proper caseload so that they can, get the work done in a timely manner and during their 8-hour day, a 40-hour week. The IRS talks an awful lot about work-life balance. And this is one of those cases where they're going to need to show that they are backing this up.
Yeah, when you're doing the revenue officer job 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, and you're doing that hard work, you need time to yourself. If you don't, you will burn out. You will have other issues that could come forward, which can impact your work life as well as your personal life. So once again, where this stands is that NTEU has presented this information to the management. We want to see what the agency says in response, and then we'll go from there. ROs should not be expected to put in this so-called love time, more than 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day. You're not getting paid for it or even getting compensated with time off later. So we don't want to see this culture where you're expected to put this extra time in. And that's where NTEU is trying to intervene on your behalf as a revenue officer. So that's where it stands. We'll certainly keep you posted on where it goes from here. Let's move on, Duncan, to a news organization that we've quoted quite often, ProPublica. It's a nonprofit news organization that do terrific investigative journalism. And their recent story, I should say, they produce a lot of journalism. A recent story is a tactic being used by the Heritage Foundation, a very conservative group, to basically flood federal agencies with Freedom of Information Act requests, or FOIA, FOIA is what they're called. Literally thousands of these requests. Explain what they're looking for, and just talk a little bit about what groups such as Heritage can and cannot request under the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, and this is something that I saw this really disturbed me. Anybody has the right to do a Freedom of Information Act. I have no problem with that. If they've got they've got their own case, they want to see what's been done on it. If they think something nefarious has happened, that's understandable. And please just understand, folks, that if you're, writing work emails, those possibly could be released in a FOIA request, depending upon if we take a look at it and determine it is work related. So we want to make sure that, people who are justifiably wanting the FOIA requests are able to do it. Well, what the Heritage Foundation has done, and this is all part of Project 2025, right out of the playbook, is they are using these FOIA requests, and we're hearing it could be as many as 50,000 FOIA requests. Again, as you say, inundating different agencies to find out what employees are doing and who might or might not be suitable in the next administration. And this goes back to their Schedule F plan, where they want to take people that they feel might be in a leadership type position and to be able to remove them if they are not suitably loyal, is their thinking. Every employee that comes in swears an oath to the Constitution. We're not, there shouldn't be any loyalty to any one administration unless you're a political employee. That's totally different. Not talking about political appointees. We're talking about career civil servants, people who have said, you know what? I'm not looking to get rich. I'm looking for a good job, a steady job that I can help the American taxpayer, the American public. That's what I want to do. And, to have this type of thing over your head where they can take, I want, anything that is considered work related, I want Teams messages, I want emails, and they're looking for certain keywords, almost like things that are woke, quote unquote. It's highly disturbing to me that they might take this tact. As we've talked before, the federal civil service should be very nonpartisan. People individually can have their political beliefs, absolutely, and we'll talk about that later in our Hatch Act. But if you're coming to work, you need to put aside your political preferences, biases, whatever it might be, and just do the work that you're assigned to do, that you should be doing, regardless of who it may represent, things of that nature. You do it by the code, you do it by the law, you do it by the Internal Revenue Manual, whatever particular issue you're doing. And when we see these types of FOIA requests that are definitely trying to, and they're proud of it. They're saying that we're looking at this. We want to make sure people are doing their jobs. Well, you know what? The vast majority, the 99.9% of the employees out there are doing their jobs. And if there's a 0.1% in different agencies that are not, okay, you deal with those, but you don't do it by intimidation or loyalty tests, which it appears this is what they're looking for.
When I got into management, I had a manager above me who would always say, before you put anything into writing or make a decision, just imagine what it would look like if it was in the funny papers. In other words, what would it look like as a headline on a newspaper or any other, news website or TV or whatever? And I think that's what you need to do, is just think about it. Anytime you put anything down to writing, just be professional. We're not asking you to be careful, or just make sure that you are dealing with the issue at hand and you're being professional in your writing. So I think that's the basic message here. And when you inundate a group of agencies with thousands of FOIA requests, it could be a year or two before some of these are even fulfilled
Yeah.
because there are just too many of them. There's only so many people can. I knew some of the people who dealt with FOIA requests. They were always behind, and there's not a whole staff of people doing this. There's a finite number of people who work on these things. Let's move on to something else because there's some language in the contract as it was revised during midterm bargaining. Article 50 deals with telework, and some language has been added on hardship situations within telework. I want to read this new language, and they're going to cite the Code of Federal Regulations in here. It's called the CFR. Here's what it says. Consistent, and this is the heading is telework for medical reasons. Consistent with 5 CFR section 531.605, an employee may request a temporary exception to the twice per pay period reporting requirement to recover from an injury or medical condition under the temporary hardship program as pursuant to Article 15, Section 9, and another part of the contract. The employer has determined that managers may approve such requests provisionally on a case-by-case basis. Temporary hardships do not count towards the 2 pay period exception provided in another part of Section 50. So that's a lot of language, a lot of contract language. So, Duncan, what does this mean to the employee?
Yeah, basically to cut through, what this is saying is if you've had an injury or a serious illness and you can't go into the office or you don't want to go into the office because you may be contagious, something of that nature, you can request from your manager, I've got this broken leg or I've got whatever. I can work, but I'm not really mobile. I can't, do much. Or like I said, you're sick, you're contagious. You can request from your manager. You can request, this is not a given, you can request to work from home instead of reporting to the office the twice a pay period. Now, some of the key words in here are may, the manager may. It doesn't say the manager will, it says the manager may. So that gives, discretion to management on this provisionally. That means they can say, okay, we'll do this if you provide us something. And I would expect, and from what I've heard from executives and managers, how they're reading this is that they can ask for, if you've got this type of situation where you're saying, I'm really sick, I can't come into work, but I can still work from home. Well, management would be within their legal rights, and this is what I'm hearing a lot of them are going to be doing, to ask for the medical documentation on this. Now, if you've been injured, let's say you broke an ankle, just saying it for instance, and you're not moving around really good, I would expect that you've been to a doctor, they've diagnosed this, hopefully they've, repaired what they can, and that they'll be able to provide you with a note saying, hey, look, this person's not really mobile, they are still able to work, please excuse them for this amount of time. If you are sick and contagious and you can contact, your doctor will write you a note saying, hey, look, this person is okay to work, but I don't want them going into the office because they may, something may happen with this for others. That's something I could see management looking for. And so the key things here are may, provisionally, case by case basis. And I would hope that, most of this is done by a frontline manager. That's what the frontline managers get paid to do, is make decisions. Too often we've seen where, we're going to make sure we want the executive to make the decision on this, or a second level manager. Why? A manager is going to be the one closest to the situation. They're going to know the issue. The employees supposedly or hopefully already talked to them about this. So why wouldn't you allow the frontline manager on the case by case basis? So if you have this type of situation, and you've got and especially if you've got medical documentation, talk to your manager, say, hey, look, I've got this issue. I need a temporary hardship. This shouldn't count against my 2 per year, twice a pay period coming in, the 2 periods that you've got per year. to have to come in to report because of my medical condition. This is over and above that. Talk to your manager. If the manager is saying, hey, look, I've seen your medical documentation, I don't like it, I don't believe it, something of that nature, reach out to your chapter, talk to them, see if they can reach out to your management and figure out exactly where the problem is. Oftentimes, we've here in Chapter 49 in Indiana, and I know countless of my fellow chapter leaders have been able to resolve these types of issues with conversations with managers. So we would be happy, I would be happy. Our Chapter 49 stewards and officers would be happy, and I'm sure other chapter leaders would be happy on this. So this is something that came out of the midterm bargaining. There are other things that came out, but this is one of the big ones for bargaining unit employees to have this availability if they do meet this criteria.
So I think the main thing is this is new language. If you think it may apply to you, work with your manager. If you don't think it's working out well, talk to your local chapter and see if the local chapter can work something out for you. The goal of this is if you're really, number one, are unable to come into the office for physical reasons, injury would be one, or if you've got a communicable disease where you could be a danger to others by coming into the office, could you waive that 2-day per pay period requirement to be in the office, at least provisionally, as you say, if you can provide the documentation. So that's where it sits, and be aware of that. And if you have questions, contact your local chapter. NTEU and IRS agreed to this language, and it's authorized under federal regulations that are cited in that contract.
Yeah, Larry, one thing I would like to add, this came into effect October the 1st. So if you're saying this happened to me in September or August or something of that nature, no, it's just come in effective October the 1st. So just a few days ago. And that's why we're wanting to make sure that everybody's aware of it now.
Okay, very good point, and thank you for clarifying that, Duncan. As we mentioned before, every time we have a podcast before this year's election, we want to talk about the Hatch Act. A section of the Hatch Act deals with political contributions. Can federal employees make contributions to political campaigns? Are there any requirements or limitations on that? So, Duncan, what can we tell people about making contributions to political campaigns in this election season?
Yeah, this comes up quite a bit. People want to follow the Hatch Act. They want to do the right things. And so, well, I'm not sure if I can contribute money. You absolutely can contribute money. You can contribute to a particular candidate, a particular party, a particular PAC, a political action committee. You can do all of those things. You want to make sure that you don't do it on government time, government property, or using government equipment. Those are the three big provisos for that. The other part of this is you can contribute money. You can't ask, if I can't say, Larry, I really like candidate A and I've contributed money for him. I would like you to contribute some money for him. Can you give me some money so I can put it in under your name? You cannot solicit money for any candidate, any political party, or any political action committee. You can't solicit for it. You can donate, you can give, but you cannot solicit for that. That would be a Hatch Act violation. So want to make sure that people know what they can do, which is, like, say, you can give if you wish, but do not solicit others to give money. You can say, hey, look, I really like this person, party, platform, PAC, whatever, their ideas, but you can't follow that up by saying, would you give money to them? Or I'm collecting money to give to them. You can't go that far, but you absolutely can express your rights as a U.S. citizen and give money.
Okay, very good clarification on that. Keep that in mind and during this election season. And Duncan, it is now your turn to provide your final comment.
Yeah, my final comment today is going to be on a former president. It's probably not going to be the one you're thinking of. This former president just recently turned 100 years old. Whether you think that Jimmy Carter was a good president, fair president, bad president, I want to talk about Jimmy Carter as a human being. And for somebody who I think, you know, embodies what we should all try and be. I know I fall short of it, and I think most people do. This is a man who, after serving as president in his 70s and 80s, was literally working for Habitat for Humanity. He was putting up houses, he was building houses to help others. His focus has been on world peace during his administration and long after. And the man was just totally devoted to his family, loved his wife, Rosalind, who passed away, in the last year. And he, like I said, he just turned 100. And again, he was not the greatest president in the world. He was not the greatest president we've ever had by anybody's estimation. But I would say that he is one of the best human beings that we've ever had as a president, just because of his actions, the way he's lived his life, and tried to do that. So, I just want to give a shout out to President Carter, who's been in hospice for a very long time, and that I hope that all of us can try to live up to some of the embodiment of what his life's work and legacy has done, and try and be there for others.
Well, a couple of things about Jimmy Carter. Number one is that he was president when the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 was enacted. He was instrumental in getting that done, and that has laid the groundwork for federal unions and employees to be heard in the workplace and have a voice in the workplace. So he did accomplish much. And there's something else that people tend to forget over time. There are still big problems in the Middle East. My heart goes out to all the civilians who are hurting in the Middle East right now because of all the violence. But there has not been an all-out war in the Middle East because Jimmy Carter brokered a deal between Egypt and Israel. There can't be an all-out war in the Middle East against Israel unless Egypt is a part of it. Egypt, although their relations aren't always warm and fuzzy all the time, Israel and Egypt have a peace treaty that has lasted ever since it was enacted and agreed to at Camp David in the 1970s, late 1970s, by Jimmy Carter. So even though they don't have anything close to a perfect peace in the Middle East, it would be much worse without that peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And even after the president of Egypt was assassinated, that peace treaty continued, and it continues to this day. So and Jimmy Carter was a very, very great man in so many different ways, but not a perfect man. None of us are, absolutely. But I think if you take a look at what he accomplished in his life, it certainly adds up to quite a bit. Sorry, Duncan, I'm going to talk about baseball for my final comment. I'm a big fan of a team that doesn't have a big payroll, the Cincinnati Reds. We had an underperforming year. They fired the manager. We got a new manager for next season. We're a team with a low payroll, but even with that, the Reds sort of underperformed based on the talent that was there. The Detroit Tigers, in the first round of the Major League Baseball playoffs, defeated the Houston Astros. It's a 2 out of 3. They won 2 games in a row. They're now in the next they're on the next level of the playoffs. But people need to know the Detroit Tigers have a total payroll of all their players together for this season, $18.8 million. Josh Hader, the man, the reliever, who was in the game at the end of the game when Detroit won that second game against Houston, the man on the mound at that time alone earned $19 million in this season. And there are 3 other pitchers on the Detroit Tiger roster. Each one of them earned in this season we're in now more than the entire Detroit Tiger payroll for players. So, yes, it's tough to compete in baseball with all the money being thrown around. But, Duncan, in baseball, as in many other parts of life, money can be a big advantage, but money is not everything.
Absolutely well said. And the Tigers were, a surprise team this year, and they are a team to pull for. They are scrappy.
Well, and I think, if you got to pull for a team in the playoffs, I think Detroit's a team that would be easy to get behind. So Duncan Giles, thank you once again. Again, we will not have a podcast next week. That's all my fault. In case you want to know, I have some personal situations I'm dealing with, as Duncan has had in the past. And so we're going to have those weeks where we do not have a podcast. Next week will be one of those. Again, we thank you for taking the time that you take to watch or listen to this podcast. The only reason I donate my time as a volunteer retiree, and that Duncan takes part of his busy time as a chapter president to record these podcasts most weeks, is that you give us the feedback that we provide something that is of value to you. So as long as that's the case and we're still able to do that, we'll continue this podcast. In the meantime, please be safe and be kind.